Okay, our next unit, we're starting here, and our next unit is going to go into looking at the internal systems. We'll be looking at the systems from a comparative perspective. So each system, we'll look at it in invertebrates, we'll look at it in different groups of animals. We'll also look at the human system in each of the major systems that make up animal bodies. But we begin with a chapter on animal structure and function. And so in this, we'll be looking at how the structure of certain organs and organ systems or even the tissues of the organ, the structures of these things relate directly to their function. So that's a major theme that we mentioned in biology. So here, this little example out of your textbook shows an example of connection between structure and function. This looks at the little setae that are on the pads of these gecko lizards. And the setae have little spatula type of surfaces on them that stick to a surface. So there are these structures on the pads of the feet of these animals, and the structure is broad and flattened, and it actually sticks to the surface. So the structure relates directly to the function. Like Spider-Man can walk up the walls, so can the gecko lizard. But we see this in a lot of different examples in the animal kingdom. This is a good example here in the bones of the birds. The wings of these birds have bones that are actually hollow and they're tapered. You see the tapered kind of an aerodynamic shape at the front of the bone. And this structure of the hollow, making it very lightweight, and with a tapered front end like the wing of an airplane, helps to uh, stop the resistance of the air, and these types of structures relate to the function of flight in the wing. So we could look at this at a lot of different levels in biology, this relationship of structure to function, all the way from the cellular level where we see certain structures, say inside the cell, to the tissue level, to the organ level. And so we study that hierarchy of structural organization in the animal. Um, so we'll look at examples of those levels in a minute, but first we mentioned that structure is related to the anatomy. So we're talking about different parts of the animal's body, and function relates to the physiology. So we could talk about the physiology at a large scale, like an organ's physiology, or we could talk about cellular physiology, different things that are taking place in the cell. So structure and function is actually related to, or is actually referring to, the anatomy and physiology of animals. All right, so here's where we look at different levels. We can start at kind of the cellular level and look at the function of certain cells, like in this case, so we have muscle cells, and we can look at the function and structure of that particular cell. And how it can expand. It has striations in it that allows it to move in and out. And so that's the function of those cells. Then we can look at the tissue level. That's the next level up. So we're moving in a hierarchy up to higher levels. Tissues are groups of cells that have common functions. And so muscle tissue has a function of elasticity in the body. And then we can move to the next level, which is an organ. So in this case, we're looking at a cardiovascular organ, the heart, which is made up of different types of muscle. And there's other tissue that is found in this organ. So organs are not just made up of one specific type of tissue, but rather multiple. But the muscle tissue is certainly a part of this organ. The next level is the organ system. So organ systems are made up of multiple organs. And here in the circulatory system, we have the heart and vessels, the blood within the vessels. And so that's the next level up. And then our highest level would be the organism itself. And that's the study of how these organ systems work together to provide a function to keep that organism alive. Okay, so this chapter introduces that theme of the concept or relationship between structure and function. We can look at this at different levels. The one level we're going to concentrate, or your chapter concentrates on, is this tissue level. So we can recognize certain types of tissues that make up all of the organs in the animal body. And so that's what we're going to do. The major types of tissues that make up the animal bodies are epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. So we have 4 types of tissues that make up the animal and human body. So let's start with the epithelial tissue. The epithelial tissue is tissue that lines the organs or lines the organism. So for instance, our skin is a type of epithelial tissue. Organs have a covering of tissue. That covering of tissue is an epithelial tissue. So the main function of this type of tissue is to protect that organ or the organism and to keep things from getting into the interior tissue of that organ or organism, and to allow certain things out and in. So certain things can come in and out. Secretions and absorption can take place through this tissue. There's different types based on the type of cell it is, or the kind of grouped on their cell shape. There's 4 major cell shapes. The first one is called squamous. Squamous refers to these flattened cells. Here, the pink cells in this example here are squamous cells. Simple squamous means there is one layer. So here's a layer, simple squamous. We would find that on the air sacs of the lungs have a covering. So we just want one layer because actually we want things to go in and out of those easily. So simple squamous epithelial is one type. Here's another squamous. It's still flattened cells, but it's stratified. Stratified means there's multiple layers. All of these pink stratified cells here are layers of these stratified cells. So multiple layers, we use the term stratified. All right, so that's one type we have is our stratified. Another type is cuboidal. As that name kind of implies, the cells take on a cube type shape. So that you see this here in this part of the in this structure of the kidney, where we have these tube systems in the kidney, and they form these epithelial cells form these tubes that are in the kidneys. So those are called cuboidal epithelial. The next one we mentioned in the outline is columnar. Right here is columnar. Columnar are these long, slender cells that resemble a column. All right, so we have our flattened cells, we have our cuboidal cells, and we have our columnar cells. Here, these form the lining in our intestines. Here is this layer of epithelial cuboidal cells. Here's in our respiratory tract, we have these stratified columnar cells here that have cilia on them. So if the cells have cilia, we call those ciliated cells. So we have 4 major types, again, based primarily on their shape. All right, next major type of tissue is a very diverse group of tissues, and these are called connective tissues. Connective tissues are very diverse, and in this we have tissues like the tissues that make our ligaments and tendons are a type of connective tissue. Well, the first thing we can mention is in our connective tissues, we can group these into either loose or specialized. So let's mention the loose connective tissues first. So loose connective tissues do not have a specialized function. There, you could think of them as being loosely scattered throughout the body. All right, so that's loose connective tissues, not really tightly packed together to form a specific function. All right, so that's our loose connective tissues are found throughout the body under the skin. All the other types of connective tissues are very specialized, meaning they have very specialized functions in the body. All right, so as we mentioned a minute ago, the fibrous connective tissues are one of those. They make up our ligaments and tendons. And the fibrous connective tissues are, as that name implies, they are fibrous. They are long strands of or fibers that form this type of connective tissue. And of course, the function of our connective tissues are for elasticity and support. So for these are also referred to, we use the term in our outline there, dense connective tissue. So both of these are words that kind of describe the appearance of the tissue. We have fibrous, meaning that they're long fibers, and dense, meaning that they're just densely packed together. And you can kind of see that these are strands of cells and they're densely or very tightly packed together. So dense connective or fibrous connective tissues make up our ligaments and tendons. The next one there in the outline we mentioned is cartilage. All right, so cartilage over here. Cartilage is a tissue that provides cushioning in joints. So we see this in our vertebrae, we see it in our elbows and knees, and so that's our cartilage. It also makes our some of our structures like our ears and nose are made up of cartilage. So its function is for cushioning of the joints and also maintains body shapes in different parts. All right, the next connective tissue we mentioned is bone in the outline there. Bone, here it is. Bone is an actual living tissue. It's just a hardened tissue. So bone is a hardened living tissue. Of course, its function is for protection, like in our rib cage, it protects all of our interior body, and also support for our body. So the bone builds our skeletal system that we have for support in our body. Okay, the next tissue we mentioned there is adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is another word for fat tissue. Its main function is for energy storing. So our fat cells store energy that we can use. So we need those. Of course, you can have too much of this tissue can be harmful to you, but it is very important in the functioning of storage of energy in our body. That we can use. And the last tissue that's a connective tissue is blood. Blood is a living connective tissue, and it's a tissue that is not tightly packed cells, but it is in a fluid medium. So our blood is a tissue, and it's a liquid. And so we have in our blood, we have various types of cells. We have our red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are all cellular components of our blood. And we have other things in our blood as well, plasma that contains different types of things that are transported in our blood, but that is a connective tissue. All right, so we still have two more types of tissues that we're going to look at, and we're going to pick those up in the continuation of this lecture in the next podcast. And then we also are going to talk about how these function, how these tissues function together to form organs in our next podcast.